For me, as I mentioned, I worked in climate tech, and I deeply, deeply believed in climate tech for a very long time. When I first came across, we didn't call it climate tech back in 2010, it was called clean tech or green tech at the time. And when I first came across the kind of technologies that we're working with, I was so inspired and I was so filled with hope. And I was coming across things like, fuel cells and biomaterials and supercapacitors and things that I had never heard of and didn't know existed. And I was just so struck by the ingenuity of it and the idea that there were these technologies that gave us the possibility to do the things that we need to do in our society, but without having the destructive, extractive impact that we're clearly having. And that was so exciting to me and so hopeful. And I think it is to so many people that work within climate tech. I think it's why it's a really attractive sector to people to work in. And I loved the community. I still do love the community within climate tech because it's just filled with good people who genuinely want to make a difference, who really are passionate and kind of commit their lives to this cause. So it is a fantastic story. And I think there are elements of it that are true. I do believe that we will always need technology. We're always going to need to power hospitals, for, to use a sort of really obvious example. Like, we will always need tech. But the problem is that the deeper I got into climate tech, I began to see sort of systemic problems that I wasn't seeing any kind of movement on. So what I mean by that is the whole model overall of climate tech is built on a sort of fundamentally capitalistic model, and it's powered by money. The whole thing is you fundraise as a startup, you build your valuation, and you aim for an exit. And those exits are typically means that what's happening is that you're getting bought out by a big corporation. So the initial funding is coming from big corporations, and then the value is going back into those corporations. But the problem is that those big corporations are the ones that have been largely responsible for getting us into the mess that we're in the first place, because they're completely, profit driven. A lot of their business models are sort of fundamentally extractive. So that's a real problem to me, that I think we're genuinely trying to create this real innovation and this real major shift, but we're doing it in the same model that business has always been done. No one has kind of looked at the fundamental model and go, that's where we really need to apply the innovation. We're applying all of the innovation on the technology, but we're not looking at actually how the system is set up. There's very little awareness of the kind of systemic issues, in my experience. And another thing is kind of intersectionality. So I think typically the technology is being made and sold to corporations to allow them to do what they're doing, albeit, yes, in a cleaner and a more efficient way, but fundamentally to continue with business as usual. Or climate tech is being made to support, privileged white Western nations. That's where this technology is going. It is, in very few cases, going to the people who are going to be most affected by climate change. And I think there's a real lack of awareness around intersectionality within climate tech. So it's not. So I'm treading carefully, because I still have a lot of love and affection, and I really feel that there are very good people making very good technologies. But I think that these systemic questions need to be asked, and it became increasingly frustrating to me that they weren't being asked. And as I sort of stepped back, as I got to a decade or more in this sector, and asked the question of, can I kind of quantify the impact that my company, the companies we've worked with, this sector has had in the last 10 years? Can I say, look, this is where we started, and these are all the improvements that have been made? I struggled to answer that question when I really sort of zoomed out and looked on a global scale. It's I don't see that improvement. So to me, the shift that I think the vast majority of us know needs to happen and are desperately craving, it needs to come from somewhere else. It isn't going to come from climate tech. There will be a role for climate tech, absolutely, but that is not going to be where we see fundamental shift happening. And that's what led me into exploring concepts around regeneration. And that's why I came into the Rebiz program, because I realized something has to change at a more fundamental level. It has to change within us, within our consciousness, within how we see the world, because otherwise we're just perpetuating the same system. We need a fundamental shift in worldview. We are nature, and that had never been my understanding before. I grew up in the countryside. I grew up as someone surrounded by nature. I was extremely fortunate in that regard. I've always loved spending time outdoors in nature, but I never thought nature and I are the same thing. I am part of this. It was always, there was always a sense of us, people, and nature, and a separation between the two. And I think that truth, it's easy to sort of gloss past it and go, yeah, we're nature, I get it. Like, it's such a big realization. It's something that you really, really need to sit with and remember every day, I think, because when you really take that on board, you think of how much of our bodies are water, and yet we're polluting our rivers and our oceans. But we are literally, the vast majority of our body is water. We cannot exist without nature. We cannot breathe without nature. And we of course we know this intellectually, but I don't think we've embodied that truth. And if I then sort of extrapolate that back to my experience within climate tech, that there's also a connection there, because climate tech, and in fact the vast majority of sustainability, is focused on emissions. And I understand why, but there is an issue with that. And I'm not speaking from a scientific perspective here, but emissions are something intangible. They're literally invisible. So we talk constantly about CO2 emissions, which are not something that we can see or touch or really have any kind of relationship with. They're abstract and they're almost existential. So we're making the whole problem something that is removed from us, that we can't really see, that we can't really picture or understand or have a proper connection with. Whereas there is so little talk within sustainability, within climate tech, comparatively, around biodiversity. Now, biodiversity is something we can all see and touch and smell and have a relationship with. It's all it's not all around us, but we can access it. We can be in with it. We can put our hands in it. We can sit in it and smell it. Like, that is something that we can have a real tangible relationship to. I just don't think is possible when we talk about something abstract like emissions. I can understand that I have a connection with that tree that's going to be pulled down because the road needs to be widened. I can feel that. And I think when we feel it, when there's an emotional connection, that's when we can really be motivated to action in a way that's far more powerful than we're talking about some sort of abstract invisible gases. I would start by being really honest with yourself about your current work situation. I think it's a really good to ask that question of, does the work that I do and the organization that I do it for, is that aligned with actively protecting and restoring life? Or is it maybe the opposite, right? And just, it's not an easy question to ask, but I think it's a really, really good starting point, because a lot of the time we want to almost will the organization. Like, a lot of people that I talk to, perhaps, that are listening to this, they're already somewhat in this space. They're already perhaps in the sustainability space, and they're, similar to me in climate tech, they want to believe in it. They so much want to make a difference. They're giving all of their energy to try to have this impact, and it's just not happening. And so I think just start by being really honest with yourself. Another question you can ask is, what is the ultimate purpose of the organization that I work for? If that ultimate purpose is to generate profit or generate value for shareholders, Like, that gives you some information about the realistic possibility that change is going to happen within that organization. I was talking to someone yesterday who does sustainability reporting and certification within an organization. And they were saying they'd come to the realization there was money to employ them to do their job, there was money to pay for the certifications, and there was no money to make any actual changes. Right? This is so often people's experience within sustainability work. It it lights a fire in me, an angry fire in me. This is so often people's experience, is that you are there so that an organization can say that they're doing it. They can have all the nice labels and badges that said they're doing it, but when it actually comes to making meaningful change, it doesn't happen. So just start with yourself about being honest. It doesn't mean you have to change tomorrow. Just I think it's really important to have that awareness of where you are, and then you can start building your plan from there. I think we have to have hope and belief that this future is possible for all of us and for us as individuals, and allow ourselves to be guided by that. That it's so easy to get pulled into, whether it's despair or disbelief that it's possible, or just get sucked back into the system that says, what are you doing? What are you doing? This can't be done. No, just come back here to your nice, safe salary within this nice, safe organization and keep doing exactly what we've been doing that has brought us to the brink of collapse, and don't look at it too closely. We have to have faith, and that's, whatever faith expression to is, we have to believe and we have to trust that we will find the solutions, that we will, each of us, find that sense of purpose and bring all those purposes together to effect the transformation that we need.